Here in Texas, we're starting to see the return of tropical moisture. We've got the stratocumulus layer at about 3,500 feet, and it is building northward. We can see this moisture on the surface map. If you look down in Texas, dew points are coming up into the 50s in much of the eastern part of the state. Now, I did put a dry line out here. That's just kind of tentative because I think that's where the dry line will start building up. It's still very early in the moisture return cycle, but probably over the next 24 hours we should see that dry line start to firm up a little bit as this low pressure system approaches from the northwest. Here's what it looks like on the GFS panels. Dew points coming up into the 50s. You can see that green making it northward. And then this little boundary here indicating probably where the dry line is. Now you can see the cold front advancing. However, that's going to rapidly undercut the dry sector and eliminate the dry line during the day tomorrow. In the western states, we have a 1030 millibar high across Nevada, driving a fresh round of cold air into places like Vegas, Salt Lake City, and the Four Corners area. And then up to the north, a very well-developed baroclinic system in the Hudson Bay region. You can see those 20s and 30s contrasting sharply with the below zero temperatures. We have a new system coming together in Alberta and British Columbia, also with that strong temperature gradients. And then up to the north, of course, we have the true Arctic air mass and the temperatures running about minus 49 at Fort Good Hope, Northwest Territories, and minus 44 around Baker Lake, Nunavut, and a couple of other minus 40s. And these are afternoon temperatures. Not that they're getting any sunlight. We're pretty close to the solstice, so the sunlight is only coming up into the subarctic regions. Now, the two stations we're interested in, those are in the Northwest Territories. They're located right there, Fort Good Hope up to the north and Norman Wells to the south. What we can see in common with them is they're in the Mackenzie River Valley, which is a low-lying area that's fairly well protected by this mountain range to the south. Now, I did look at the meteor observations. Fort Good Hope got as low as minus 51 overnight, and Norman Wells got as low as minus 53, and that was about mid-morning this morning. That's some incredibly cold air. I was thinking about how neat it would be to do a forecast lab live stream from there. Maybe one of these days we'll try something like that. Going to need a lot more funding for that, though. And at the other end of the spectrum, there's Texas, with the warm temperatures, the dew points in the 50s, and it almost looks like spring down there. So we're going to grab a sounding in this area and see what the moisture return looks like. Let's try around Corpus Christi. Yep, showing an inversion there, and you can see the winds are pretty well backed down near the surface. There's probably been some very strong modification of that air mass in the low levels, whereas there you can see some remnants of that polar air at about 1 kilometer. And then off the coast, down in the offshore areas of Texas, now that looks like some fairly fresh polar air, topping out about right there, maybe a little higher, and you can see that there's still a lot of residual cold air at about 1 kilometer, and there's that strong easterly flow right there. Now, another way to evaluate that is to look at trajectories. Let's see what kind of air is infiltrating the Corpus Christi area. So we'll go to the High Split website. We're going to do a forecast trajectory, but it's going to go back in time. So I like to use that GFS 192 hour. And we'll set up levels at 100, 500, and 1,000 meters. And there's our output. The red is going to be the lowest. The blue is the mid levels, actually at about 1,000 to 1,500 feet off the ground. And the green is a little bit higher. We can see that all of those have a Pacific origin. And at least two of them originate from Colorado and the Four Corners area. We know that when the air mass was back there, it was fairly cold, and it looks like that went out into the Gulf. It picked up some moisture and warmth and circulated right back into the Corpus Christi area. So that's confirming that this is regurgitated, recycled polar air. And if this was true tropical air, it would be originating from the southern Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, or the far southern Atlantic. All right, and that snow depth from the storm that affected the Northeast the other night. This band right here, this is widespread 10-inch amounts. And we can see that the axis does run from just north of Scranton up through south of Albany, around Hudson, and to just north of Boston. And we can see a little spotting there of 20-inch amounts. So that confirms that we have widespread 10-inch amounts, and looks like another little cluster right there of 10-inch amounts in the northern suburbs of New York City. Now, another source of snow depth data is the volunteer network, part of the CoCoRaHS system. You can take that and put that into Google and bring that up. But there it is, 24-hour snow on ground depth. And that confirms that track may be a little further to the north from what the other analysis had. And it looks like, yeah, widespread 15 to 20-inch amounts, some over 20 in New Hampshire. And then down in the populated areas of Boston and New York, looks like about roughly 3 to 12 inches. And if we manage to get clear skies, we can often pick out the actual snow areas. There's the visible satellite imagery for the northeast U.S. Let's zoom in. As that stratus and mid-cloud clears out, we can see some of the snow down there. We'll have to probably pause it about right there. The infrared imagery is not going to help us out much, so we've got to rely on that daytime visible imagery. Looks like a pretty good band there from those lakes south of Rochester, east into the Albany area, and then it looks like it gets a little harder to distinguish where that snow is. Looks like some of those forested areas obscuring some of the snow cover just a bit. And here's a good bonus shot. This is the water vapor imagery showing the progression of that snowstorm that hit the northeastern U.S. You can see where it really comes together there off the Carolinas coast, moves up into the northeast U.S., and then they get that comma head there, and the deformation zone kind of holds back there. And here comes the next system. That's the one we're dealing with right now. Obviously some shortwave energy right in there. So we're probably going to see continued development of that baroclinic pattern as we interact with some of the moisture flowing north from the Gulf of Mexico. And then for the lowdown on what's going to happen over the next week, going into Christmas and even New Year's, let's look at the upper level patterns. Well, we've got a very progressive pattern here, broken up into troughs and ridges. There's a few of them right there, and they've got kind of a small wavelength and a moderate amplitude. Overall, it is strongly zonal. Don't see any giant meridional patterns, maybe up there in the polar areas, but also we see the polar vortex right there over southwest Nunavut. The Pacific, very active, that's strongly zonal. In fact, this looks similar to what we had last week, and let's see how things progress. So we're looking for these waves to continue moving eastward, and if they don't, that indicates blocking, but I don't see that. We got a jet digging into the eastern U.S. and amplification of the troughs and ridges around the 23rd, and this is likely going to send some of that Arctic air that we saw in the Northwest Territories. That should send some of it southward. I don't think there's a whole lot of it in terms of volume, so that may somewhat limit how much Arctic air there is, but it's going to be something to watch. It certainly looks like with that degree of troughing in the eastern U.S., there probably is some significant volume to that air. Out in the Pacific, looks like that area is progressing pretty good, and the jet is not really pulling out of the Pacific. Looks like maybe some blocking getting established there in Greenland around the 28th. That might slow things down just a little bit. Yeah, see how we get that troughiness on the East Coast? The pattern has not changed there due to that downstream blocking. And that's probably going to snarl some of this stuff up a little bit. Let's see how that works out. Yeah, and we kind of end up with the very same pattern. And it looks like towards the very end, this is getting way out there, 384 hours out. But maybe for the first week of January, looks like the fire hose is trained on Vancouver, maybe Seattle. So there could be maybe some strong wintry weather. Maybe the ski resorts in British Columbia may see a little bit of a payday as far as that goes. So here's the way we read the charts. Let's go to Christmas and see what kind of weather we're expecting. Okay, that's going to be about midday Christmas. Now, we can account for the errors by just not really paying close attention to where exactly each of these troughs are. We focus on the big picture. Big ridge out west, big trough in the eastern U.S., and this jet approaching the coast. So this tells us that things are probably going to be cloudy and unsettled around Portland, Oregon, maybe Seattle. It also tells us that things will likely be fair in the western states, inland. It's likely going to be cold in the central U.S. and maybe out east, and possibly stormy in the Maritimes and eastern New England. So that much is fairly certain. We can approach this the same way with New Year's by advancing that up. Okay, that's going to be New Year's Eve, just after dark. And we see kind of a very similar picture. Why is my closing music playing? I must have left the play button going. Okay, let's fix that. Yeah, editing is tedious and sometimes unpredictable. Okay, going back to New Year's. Northwesterly flow, ridging out west, so it's still looking pretty good in the western U.S. Still looks cold in the central and eastern U.S., but there's no really strong focusing of upper level energy. So there could be some small systems in there somewhere, but overall I don't see a big precip event. That could be different on the west coast, but we're not going to be totally sure of that timing of that trough offshore. So anyway, it looks cold for much of the country and mild and fair out west, except for the coastal regions. And then a quick look at that polar outbreak for Christmas. Pivotal Weather does offer the high-resolution European model. That's really great to have. And I think that model is pretty important because the GFS is still overdoing the intensity of the polar air that it deals with. It's only accurate within about 4 to 5 days. The European seems to be a little bit more reasonable with these intensities. So we're going to look at that. Bring that forward. Yeah, there's that baroclinic system we were talking about. Remember that little S shape, that baroclinic leaf pattern we had over New Mexico and West Texas? That's that system coming together and moving east. A few showers and thunderstorms in the Gulf Coast region. And then we have the weather system coming together up north. And I'm guessing at the frontal positions, we really need thickness. For some reason, we don't have it on this frame. But for Arctic air mass intensity, we can look at pressures. So anyway, yeah, there goes one system heading out. Whatever this high is looks to be Pacific in origin. And then we're looking up here in Canada. So there's the lead wave right there in the Dakotas. Systems are going to be looking like that, and then everything spills out into the Great Plains. 1034 millibar high, this is still on target. Remember yesterday we were talking about pressure values, and the GFS was up at 1041, 1042, something like that. The European model was down around 1036, if I remember correctly, and it looks like it is still in that weak ballpark, so I think this is pretty much on target. However, the cold air is spilling down. There's the calm ahead, the deformation zone up there, snow up in Minneapolis and Des Moines, UP and Michigan, and elsewhere, lots of cold air filtering down on the 23rd, Festivus, and 24th, Christmas Eve. And there it comes. Looks like there's enough moisture for a squall line in the southeast U.S., and then for Christmas Eve, cold pretty much everywhere. And then these storms clear on out early Christmas morning in the Northeast. So it definitely looks cold, but it's not going to be a record-breaking type cold air event, at least from what I can tell. Okay, and that'll do it for this edition of Forecast Lab. Hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoy the webcast, please support us. And if you can't support us, please like and comment and subscribe, and consider picking up some books or software from the weathergraphics.com website. All of that will help to keep this program going. Okay, hope you have a great weekend. Christmas week is next week, and we will be on the air as usual. Take care, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.